all the research on cordycepin was actually getting published, and with studies on its different anti-inflammatory, neuroinflammation properties, anti-cancer properties, anti-metabolic disease like diabetes. Everything was just popping within the year. And I said, oh, that's why it's now 5x.
Welcome back, everybody. This is a special episode of the Smarter Not Harder podcast where we dive into Tro Mune
Cordycepin,
one of our formulas. All right. I think before we get into Tro Mune and Cordycepin, I think there's an interesting question for the uninitiated here about why we should care about our immune system, and maybe perhaps going through the role the immune system has within the body. I think not to overstate the obvious here, but just let's do a quick 35,000 foot view as to immune system's role and why people should pay more attention.
If you want to do a 35,000, I actually prefer 33,000 foot view.
We can do 10,000 meters if you want for metric people.
If you want to do that, you have to consider the body as actually comprising of two parts, right? One part is the structural part, right? And the other part would be the energy production part. So just like in a cell, you have a nucleus cytosol, which is like the nucleus and the cytoplasm, and then you have the mitochondria as the energy part. So you can divide the body into those two parts all the time. And so when you're looking at the body from 33,000 feet, you could say that one of the primary things that the body does is to allocate energy, produce energy, and allocate energy where it needs to go. And guess where majority of the energy goes? It goes into protecting you. It's not protecting from viruses, etc., that are flying around. No, when you eat all of those, you're exposed to foods. Your gut is your largest immune system right now. We know, we just learned about that recently. And the body is actually teaches what is mine and not mine based on the activation of the toll-like receptors in there. You can see immediately that in order to do that, the body has to expend energy. I'd like to say the Department of Defense has a very large budget. Majority of that budget is actually for you, because without that energy, you cannot protect yourself. There would be no garbage collection. There would be no death of senescent cells. There would be on all of these things that actually make you old and sick. So when you look at it from that part, you could take a look at energy production and energy allocation. You could see that protecting you in everyday work, not just in special cases of infection, it protecting you during the everyday functioning of your body, like eating, is actually requires a large amount of energy for the body to use it and protect you. So then that's where you actually take a look at how do we boost your immune system. How do we boost the immune system? And that's the point of view that I'd like the listeners actually to take when they're looking at something like this. Why do you have to boost the immune system? Because your Department of Defense has a huge energy budget. That's where the first thing that whatever you eat, etc., is actually used to protect you. And guess what? When you triage your energy like this, when it comes to defending you, if you don't have much energy, or you don't on the one side, or you don't have much in terms of a boosted immune system, what happens is that the energy would go to protecting you, and then everything like DNA repair and other things get on hold, right? Garbage collection, everything else, they get on hold because the body will just fight first, right? So it actually behooves us to, my God, I sound like a chat GPT. I've been using the term forever and ever, and now they say that it's being used by chat GPTs. Anyway, I was actually shocked. I've used it since high school. But anyway, because it sounds pretentious, I'm kidding. So anyway, and therefore we really need to strengthen our immune system if we do not want to have a massive drain on an energy reserves, which can be used to optimize the functioning of your health. Right?
So there's some side shout out here, right? Because for those that are clinicians listening to this, we go a lot into the Department of Defense and Health Optimization Medicine and Practice in our gut immune system module. Actually, Scott put that all together. It's very in depth in the discussion of how to really optimize gut function and the immune system function. But here we want to direct the conversation to um, Tro Mune in particular. And I think an important thing to highlight is that, at least in our product roadmap initially, there wasn't really a plan to do an immune system product. And as we were looking into various ingredients and traveling to the far-flung edges of the multiverse to source these ingredients, we stumble upon things sometimes that work out well as single ingredient products. The first of which, of course, was Just Blue. We already did an episode on methylene blue and its role in 16 milligrams and that's role in that particular dosing. But we found a molecule in this case when we were researching Tro-Z that was just so freaking interesting that we decided to spin it out as its own formula. And that was Cordycepin. Now, those of us who are Pedro Pascal lovers remember The Last of Us. We've all gone through the conversations now about how Cordyceps is taking over the world, how it's going to cause us to be zombies. But I think the vector that we can go in here is the difference between Cordyceps and Cordycepin, because oftentimes people confuse the two. Scott, since you're sitting there anxiously awaiting to talk, maybe you need some Tro Calm, but not anxiously, just ready. Let's go through the difference between Cordyceps and Cordycepin.
Actually, I had a question for Ted on this one, but I'm happy to answer too. Is that, as I recall, Ted, you were doing a lot of research on Cordycepin specifically for deep sleep, and then somehow you found out what was happening in the world around Cordycepin as well, correct?
Yes, actually, I was looking at the human studies on cordycepin for deep sleep. Those are the ones that I was looking at and incorporated it into our Tro-Z formula. And then as I dug further and I kept on begging Boomer for more and more crystals of cordycepin, he found out that suddenly the price of cordycepin was 5x from our initial 1x when we were actually doing our studies on Tro-Z. And then I said, what the fuck? What's going on? Why these sudden price jumps? And that's when I saw that all the research on cordycepin was actually getting published, and with studies on its different anti-inflammatory, neuroinflammation properties, anti-cancer properties, anti-metabolic disease like diabetes. Everything was just popping within the year. And I said, oh, that's why it's now 5x. And then I said, if it has all of these properties, I said, let me take a look. I said, where does it really work? And I saw that it actually works on inflammation, right? It basically decreases your inflammatory cytokines and so on. And I said, that's the whole thing that we want to do, right? Is to prevent molecular inflammation in the first place, or help the body resolve its initial response to any form of stress, which is molecular inflammation, right? And it's like, I said, oh my God. I said, I think this is going to be like methylene blue. This is going to be like one of my everyday things that I will just take forever until I don't die. No, so anyway.
Until you upload your brain to AI.
Yeah. But anyway, that's the huge research that I did. And I said, no, this is like the methylene blue is on its own. We should have Tro Mune on its own. And so now, why the difference between Cordyceps and Cordycepin?
Yes, sure, Ted. Thank you for helping and teeing up. So if I forgot the question, which is not impossible for me, but cordycepin itself is the most active and potent ingredient in the cordyceps mushroom. And as Boomer was mentioning, cordyceps has been known for thousands of years in Chinese medicine. It's been known has a very significant improvements in overall vitality, health, libido, immune system function, strength training. There's actually been some studies on cordyceps mushroom for strength training and actually improving performance. But the main ingredient, the most active in there, is the cordycepin itself. But by weight, it's only, I think, about 0.3% per gram. So it's very little in the mushroom itself. And Now, what these studies were doing, as Dr. Ted was describing, is concentrating the cordycepin and using it in all these various scenarios, and realizing how significant this particular compound was as an immune system modulator, as an antimicrobial, and potentially as an anti-cancer. So we took it and started testing various doses of it a lot, especially Dr. Ted over here, who he can describe some of his trials and tribulations with Tro Mune. And the cool thing about cordycepin is that it's also, this is why we use it, at least initially in Tro-Z, was as it's what's called an adenosine agonist, which means that it acts just like this neurotransmitter in your body called adenosine. And adenosine in the brain causes you to feel sleepy. So as we all know from previous podcast episodes, Boomer is a fan of coffee, a big coffee lover. And what coffee does is prevents adenosine from binding in this receptor and keeps you feeling awake. And so what cordycepin does is it acts just like adenosine. It makes you feel tired. And so it can be used at night for deep sleep, but it has all these other potential immune system modulatory effects as well.
What Dr. Scott said, as I said, I don't like stories. That's called building your sleep drive, right? In life, that's why you hear all of this advice. Don't take coffee, any caffeinated coffee anymore at 2 o'clock in the afternoon if you're going to sleep at 11 o'clock at night, right? Because you're going to basically fuck up your, and that's scientific, fuck up your sleep drive. Meaning you have to build the tiredness so that when you fall asleep, right, you are actually tired. You want to fall asleep. Now, I just want to correct here, just a little tiny bit here, deviation here. People usually misunderstand sleep latency, right? When they go to sleep, they think that they should fall asleep right away. No, there's an acceptable latency period. They think that lying awake for 17 minutes is just like totally unacceptable. There is a specific latency period. You're just very impatient. So in that way, you just need our Tro-Z. But anyway, cordycepin is, the human studies actually shows that it promotes deep sleep. And the doses that we're using are actually both amenable to those clinical practitioners who are working with certain conditions, and for us without any, proud to say this, no heart disease, nothing at my age, which is the only time I get tachycardia is when I overdose. No, I'm kidding.
On caffeine.
On caffeine.
Yeah.
And it's actually perfect for immune modulation. This is what I was saying when we began this podcast, by saying that this is the best way that I have found to boost my immune system so that I do not require too much energy to funnel so much energy to protecting myself, because my immune system is normally healthy, right? Or optimally healthy.
Right. So one of the things that we thought about too here is that not only is adenosine in the brain, but adenosine also is something that helps you make energy. It's something called, if people have heard of ATP before, right? So this is adenosine triphosphate. So adenosine is everywhere, not just in the brain. And also adenosine is also in our DNA. It's actually in our genetic code. And so this is what's interesting about, it's also in bacterial DNA and viral DNA. And so there's been some interesting studies that have been actually showing that cordycepin can be used as an antiviral directly, an antimicrobial. And I've actually seen this in clinical practice, using it myself with patients and seeing how you can use the Tro Mune, use the cordycepin dosing that we have, and actually mitigate or prevent people from getting the viral syndromes that they typically would if you get it early enough. And it's actually been amazing. I gave it to my wife. She typically gets that cold that lasts for a couple, maybe about 4 or 5 days, maybe 6 days, and then has 4 weeks of a cough afterwards that keeps me up and I can't sleep. And so I gave it to her maybe 2 or 3 days into her cold, and she was done in 5 days. She slept great, and she didn't have any of that post-cold cough craziness. So this is something that I've repeated multiple times now. And so it has a fantastic antimicrobial effect as well.
And maybe I'm speaking out of line here, but why this may work for allergies and people that may have issues with allergies. In particular, I know, Ted, you have some sort of seasonal allergies when it relates to the plant life in DC. What's the mechanism, or perhaps just the reason for looking at cordycepin?
Well, as Boomer, I call Washington, D.C., the city of international pollen, right? Because each embassy can plant whatever the fuck plant is not indigenous to this city, right? So the pollen that you get here is actually quite a global pollen. And I have killer histamine response. I just am unable to function, especially in the spring. That's why I did actually my experimentation with this, and Scott and I were talking and said, Ted, it prevents mast cell degranulation. So it prevents histamine from
Mhm.
getting released into your system. And this is the first spring and summer that actually I started taking this, and it's been my mildest allergy season. In fact, the beginning of spring, which is usually the worst, right? It's called the leaky faucet syndrome, right? You're actually leaking all over and you're crying, even if it's these tears of "I wish it were fall." Right? I'm glad I'm not. I'm glad that I'm not allergic to ragweed. Right? In the fall, but anyway, it's been my mildest spring and early summer so far. And anything, the only precaution that I did was, is of course it's fashionable now to walk out with a mask. So when I go for my daily 5 mile walk, I just put on a mask, and there's just a slight, the pollen here is insane. So it actually is yellow on top of cars. It's just like an extra coating of fairy dust. But anyway, that's actually, you just feel a slight irritation, and then you wash off your eyes, of course, with something like Tears Natural or something like that, and then you're good to go. So it is actually now part of my daily routine to take it.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
And this is one where we're actually going to split into practitioner and into consumer doses. There's reasons for that. We'll talk mainly on another podcast with practitioners, but it's something that as of now we're not in stock, but we'll be back on stock on it soon. And we're super excited, especially going into things like flu season
Mhm. Yeah.
and more challenging times, allergy season, to have more Tro Mune available to
yeah,
people.
if
Yeah. Certainly as a prophylactic. Yeah.
Yeah, Scott,
Go
you
ahead,
can
Scott.
speak to this. We've seen this recommended for athletes, right? Because it increases the oxygen carrying capacity of blood. And this is also one of the reasons why, if you read about it, it's cardioprotective, right? It prevents the heart from ischemic injury, improves cardiac function. And part of this because of that. Can you speak to that more, Scott?
I think we have some ideas as to why that's happening. We know that cordycepin works as an antioxidant as well. It has antioxidant properties. It upregulates something called NF kappa B and those pathways, which are immune signaling pathways. It's working on natural killer cells, T lymphocytes. So we think all of these types of immune cells are being modulated in a beneficial way to help us with exercise, with performance, with recovery. I think the recovery piece is the big part that we're seeing a lot on the exercise side. And so we're working on various types of protocols now as a team internally to see how we can bring this out to the world. The issue, of course, is that sometimes it can make you feel sleepy, but over time, you might be able to redirect some of that adenosine to go make energy, actually. And so we're working on other pathways to help you do that. So maybe having Boomer drink a bunch of coffee, then have a bunch of Tro Mune and see what happens when he goes exercising. So we're working on all these kinds of things. But I mostly use it at night still. A lot of the research that you see out there is going to be on the Cordyceps mushroom. On that, actually, there's just a new study that showed that it was an improvement in exercise performance. So I think a lot of that has to do with cordycepin for the reasons that we're talking about. So overall, like you said, Ted, it's a very compelling compound. And I think really just we're starting to see the human research now, and very excited to see where this particular compound goes and what we can do with it.
This is actually the first time that I'm getting very American about this, because Americans, if something is good, take a lot more, which is not me. But this is actually the one that's showing so much its benefits. And for those who are actually tempted to use the mushroom itself, it's actually Cordyceps militaris, right? And the maximum that you can get there is about 2%. 2%. So to equal like 150 milligrams of our troche, you have to take about 7.5 grams of that mushroom for a single dose. So that's just in comparison. Cordyceps sinensis
It's a meal.
has a very variable amount of cordycepin. And a note for those living in Europe, Cordyceps militaris is
Cordyceps
actually a novel
militaris.
food. So, but Cordyceps sinensis is not. So it's actually quite interesting.
All right, so we're going to wrap this one up because, again, these episodes are meant to be short little bursts, a little bit of insight into the formulator, the practitioner, and how we can leverage these various formulas to optimize our health. But gentlemen, thank you for partying and powwowing with me again on such a fun product, especially Tro Mune. Just a wonderful discovery that came out of nowhere. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr.
for
Ted.
joining me.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, and to all those listening out there, have a wonderfully health optimized day.